For centuries, historians have debated the true origins of the Slavic people. Who were they before they spread across half of Europe? Were they a distinct ancient civilization, or did they emerge from older groups? Today, genetic science is finally answering these age-old questions. Slavs are one of the largest ethno-linguistic groups in Europe, with over 300 million people speaking Slavic languages. They are spread across Eastern, Central, and Southeastern Europe, from Russia and Poland to Serbia and Bulgaria. But despite their massive presence, their early history remains shrouded in mystery. Traditional theories suggest they originated from the Pripet Marshes in modern-day Ukraine and Belarus. Others believe they descended from steppe nomads or even ancient Baltic tribes. However, groundbreaking genetic studies are rewriting what we thought we knew about Slavic ancestry. Recent DNA research reveals that Slavs share deep genetic ties with ancient Indo-European tribes, including early steppe populations. These findings challenge old narratives and provide surprising insights into how the Slavs emerged as a dominant force in Europe. In this video, we will explore the fascinating genetic origins of the Slavs, tracing their roots from the ancient past to their vast expansion across the continent. We'll also uncover how Slavic DNA was shaped by interactions with Vikings, Germanic tribes, and steppe warriors. By the end, you'll see how modern genetics paints a clearer picture of Slavic identity, one that is more complex and interconnected than previously believed. Now, let's begin our journey by tracing the deep roots of the Slavic people and uncovering where their story truly begins. To understand the origins of the Slavs, we need to go back thousands of years to the early Indo-European migrations. Genetic studies reveal that Slavs are deeply connected to ancient steppe populations, particularly the Yamnaya culture, which thrived around 3000 BC. The Yamnaya were pastoral nomads from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, an expansive region stretching from modern Ukraine to western Kazakhstan. They are considered one of the primary groups responsible for the spread of Indo-European languages across Europe and Asia. DNA evidence shows that the Yamnaya people carried a distinct genetic signature that still exists in modern Slavic populations. This genetic connection links Slavs to other Indo-European groups, such as the Celts, Germanic tribes, and even ancient Persians. However, what makes the Slavs unique is the way their ancestors mixed with various groups over the centuries, creating a distinct genetic identity. By the Bronze Age, around 1500 BC, another significant population, the Corded, were culture spread across Central and Eastern Europe. These people were a mix of local Neolithic farmers and incoming steppe nomads. Genetic testing confirms that Slavic populations today have a high percentage of ancestry from Corded, where individuals. This means that while the Slavs share steppe origins with other Indo-Europeans, their genetic makeup was shaped by extensive mixing with older European populations. Archaeological evidence also suggests connections between early Slavs and the Triciniac culture, 1900 to 1200 BCE, in modern Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. This culture displayed unique burial customs and metalworking techniques that hint at an emerging Slavic identity. Over time, these early groups evolved into what would become the Proto-Slavs, an ancestral population that laid the foundation for Slavic expansion. So, while the origins of the Slavs remain complex, their deep genetic ties to steppe nomads, Bronze Age farmers, and ancient European cultures highlight a rich and diverse ancestry. But how did these early Slavic groups transform into the dominant force that shaped Eastern Europe? Let's explore their mysterious migration and expansion. One of the most defining moments in Slavic history was their massive expansion across Europe, beginning around the 5th and 6th centuries CE. This period, known as the Great Slavic Migration, reshaped the ethnic and linguistic map of Europe forever. But what triggered this sudden movement? Historians and geneticists believe the migration was largely influenced by the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. As Germanic and Hunnic tribes moved westward, they left behind a power vacuum in Eastern Europe. This allowed the early Slavic groups, likely originating from the Pripet Marshes, modern-day Ukraine and Belarus, to spread rapidly in all directions. Genetic studies support the idea that early Slavs expanded through a combination of migration and assimilation. Rather than wiping out local populations, Slavs often mixed with them, adopting new customs while preserving their language and identity. This is evident in the genetic diversity of modern Slavic nations, which show varying levels of influence from Germanic, Finno-Ugric, and even Turkic peoples. As they moved south, Slavic groups encountered and mixed with remnants of the Roman Empire, forming what we now call the South Slavs, Serbs, Croats, Bulgarians. Meanwhile, those who moved west interacted with Germanic and Celtic populations, giving rise to the West Slavs, Poles, Czechs, Slovaks. Those who remained in the east continued evolving into what would become the ancestors of modern Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians. The Slavs' expansion was not just about numbers, it was about resilience and adaptability. Their ability to settle new lands, blend with existing cultures, and form powerful kingdoms made them one of the most significant groups in European history. But what genetic traces remain from these early expansions? And how did the Slavs continue to evolve in the medieval era? Let's dive deeper into the genetic legacy of medieval Slavic kingdoms. As the Slavs expanded across Europe, they established powerful medieval kingdoms and principalities that would shape their genetic and cultural identity. But how did these early Slavic states influence the genetic diversity we see in modern Slavic populations today? One of the earliest and most influential Slavic states was Great Moravia, 9th century CE, which covered parts of modern-day Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary. Genetic research shows that people from this region carried a blend of early Slavic DNA with traces of Germanic and Avar, Turkic ancestry. The interactions between these groups were not just political, but biological. Intermarriage between Slavs and neighboring populations contributed to a rich genetic pool. Similarly, the Kievan Rus, 9th to 13th century CE, the precursor to modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, played a crucial role in shaping Slavic genetics. The rulers of Kievan Rus, particularly the Rurik dynasty, had Scandinavian Viking, Varangian ancestry, meaning that Slavic and Norse genes mixed significantly. Genetic studies of medieval burial sites in Ukraine and Russia confirm this, as many individuals show a combination of Slavic and Scandinavian DNA. This genetic mixing helped establish the diverse makeup of Eastern Slavic populations. Further south, the First Bulgarian Empire, 7th to 11th century CE, was founded by Turkic Bulgars who later Slavicized through cultural and genetic assimilation. Modern Bulgarians retain Slavic genetic markers but also show traces of Turkic and Thracian ancestry, reflecting their complex medieval history. Another key factor that shaped Slavic genetics was the Mongol invasion of the 13th century. When the Mongols conquered Kievan Rus, they left a genetic imprint on some Slavic populations. Studies show that certain Eastern Slavs, particularly in Russia, carry minor amounts of Mongolic and Central Asian DNA, evidence of historical interactions with the Golden Horde. The genetic legacy of these medieval Slavic kingdoms highlights the adaptability and diversity of Slavic populations. While their core ancestry remained rooted in early Slavic groups, centuries of interaction with Vikings, Germans, Turkic nomads, and Mongols created the rich genetic tapestry we see in Slavic nations today. But what about the modern Slavic populations? How do their genetics compare to their medieval ancestors? Modern genetic studies have identified specific DNA markers that make Slavic populations distinct. One of the most significant genetic traits found among Slavs is the high frequency of the R1A Y DNA haplogroup, a paternal lineage that traces back to the Indo-European steppe nomads. This haplogroup is especially prevalent among Eastern and Central Slavs, with some regions showing frequencies of over 50%. The R1AZ282 subclade is particularly important as it is almost exclusive to Slavic populations. This subclade likely emerged around 4,500 years ago among early Indo-European speakers before spreading through Slavic expansion. Interestingly, this haplogroup is also found in high numbers among some non-Slavic populations, such as Lithuanians and Northern Indians, due to ancient migrations from the Eurasian steppe. Beyond paternal DNA, mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, studies show that Slavs have a strong genetic continuity with early European populations. The maternal haplogroups H, U, and J, common across Europe, dominate Slavic gene pools, suggesting that while Slavs expanded culturally and linguistically, they absorbed local populations rather than replacing them. Another genetic trait seen in Slavs is a high tolerance for lactose digestion, indicating that dairy farming was an important part of their ancestors' lifestyle. This trait is particularly strong among West and Central Slavs, who have historically been more agrarian than their Eastern counterparts. Some genetic studies also point to higher-than-average resilience to cold climates among Northern Slavs, possibly due to evolutionary adaptations to harsh winters. These adaptations include a tendency toward lighter skin tones for better vitamin D absorption, and a higher prevalence of genes related to fat metabolism, which may have helped early Slavs survive in colder environments. Despite their shared ancestry, modern Slavs exhibit significant regional genetic differences due to historical migrations, conquests, and intermarriage. Poles, Czechs, and Slovaks show strong genetic ties to Germans and Balts, while Russians and Ukrainians have more genetic influence from Finnic and Uralic peoples. Southern Slavs, such as Serbs and Bulgarians, have additional genetic input from ancient Thracians, Greeks, and Turkic peoples. In summary, while Slavs share a common genetic heritage, their long history of migration and interaction with neighboring groups has created a diverse yet interconnected genetic identity. But how do these genetic findings align with historical and linguistic evidence? Let's explore the scientific breakthroughs that have helped unravel the Slavic genetic mystery. Over the last few decades, advancements in genetic research have completely reshaped our understanding of Slavic origins. By using cutting-edge DNA analysis, scientists have traced Slavic ancestry through ancient remains, migration patterns, and genetic markers unique to Slavic populations. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from ancient DNA sequencing. Archaeological sites in Poland, Ukraine, and Russia have revealed human remains dating back over 3,000 years. When analyzed, these remains showed high levels of the R1az282 haplogroup, confirming the deep Indo-European roots of Slavic populations. This genetic lineage is linked to the corded ware culture, a group of early European farmers and warriors who likely played a role in the formation of early Slavic identity. Another major discovery came from studies of early medieval burial sites. Skeletons from the 6th to 10th centuries CE, found in Central and Eastern Europe, reveal a mix of genetic signatures, proving that early Slavs intermingled with local populations rather than replacing them. Some remains show genetic continuity with earlier European tribes like the Celts, Goths, and Scythians, suggesting that Slavic expansion was not purely a matter of conquest, but also assimilation. Modern genetics has also provided insight into the Mongol and Turkic influences on Slavic DNA. Analysis of Russian and Ukrainian populations shows minor traces of Mongolic and Turkic DNA, confirming historical accounts of interactions with the Golden Horde and other nomadic groups. However, these influences are relatively small, indicating that while the Mongols ruled Slavic lands for centuries, they left only a limited genetic impact. Another fascinating discovery came through DNA testing of medieval Slavic royalty. Genetic samples taken from remains believed to belong to the Rurikid dynasty, founders of Kievan Rus, showed a mixture of Slavic and Scandinavian ancestry, proving the historical connection between the Varangians, Vikings, and the Eastern Slavs. This discovery supports historical records that the first rulers of Kievan Rus had Norse origins before fully integrating into Slavic culture. Advancements in genome-wide studies have also allowed scientists to compare modern Slavic populations with other ethnic groups. These studies confirm that while Slavs are genetically distinct, they share significant ancestry with their neighbors. For example, Poles and Czechs show strong genetic similarities with Germans and Balts, while Serbs and Bulgarians share ancestry with Greeks and Thracians. This reflects centuries of interaction, migration, and intermarriage between Slavic and non-Slavic groups. Perhaps the most exciting aspect of Slavic genetic research is its role in uncovering lost Slavic communities. DNA testing has helped identify populations in Central Asia, the Caucasus, and even Turkey with distant Slavic ancestry, remnants of medieval migrations and forced displacements. With so many groundbreaking discoveries, the question remains, what does this mean for modern Slavic identity? Slavic DNA is more than just a collection of genetic markers. It's a living record of history, migration, and cultural evolution. So what does modern genetic research tell us about Slavic identity today? One of the most fascinating aspects of Slavic genetics is the strong ancestral connection between Slavic nations. Despite centuries of political and cultural differences, genetic studies show that Slavic peoples, whether they are Russians, Poles, Serbs, or Bulgarians, share a significant amount of common ancestry. This genetic unity supports historical records of early Slavs expanding from a single origin point, later branching into different regional groups. However, Slavic DNA also highlights regional diversity. While Eastern, Western, and Southern Slavs all descend from the same ancestral population, historical migrations and interactions with neighboring groups have created distinct genetic variations. For example, Poles and Czechs have more Western European influences, while Russians and Ukrainians have traces of Finno-Ugric and Mongolic ancestry. Meanwhile, Balkan Slavs like Serbs and Croats show genetic links to ancient Thracians and Illyrians. Genetic research also sheds light on historical myths and national identity. Many Slavic nations have oral traditions about their origins, some of which were long debated by historians. DNA evidence has helped confirm or challenge these narratives. For instance, some historical theories suggested that Russians and Ukrainians had entirely different origins, but genetic studies prove they share overwhelmingly similar ancestry. Likewise, genetic research has shown that Bulgarians, despite their Turkic-named origins, are largely Slavic in their genetic makeup, with only minor Central Asian influences. Another important finding from genetic studies is the resilience of Slavic populations. Despite centuries of invasions, wars, and foreign rule, Slavic DNA has remained remarkably consistent. Even populations that were historically ruled by non-Slavic empires, such as Poles under Germanic rule or Serbs under Ottoman rule, maintain strong genetic continuity with their ancient Slavic ancestors. In the modern era, DNA testing has also helped people of Slavic descent reconnect with their roots. With the rise of genetic ancestry services, many individuals with distant Slavic ancestry, especially in North America and Central Asia, are discovering their links to Slavic heritage. This has sparked a renewed interest in Slavic history, language, and cultural traditions. Ultimately, Slavic genetics tells a story of unity through diversity. While the Slavs are not a single homogeneous group, their DNA reveals deep historical connections that transcend modern national borders. Genetic research continues to reveal new insights, strengthening the understanding of Slavic heritage and its place in the broader history of Europe and the world. As we continue to unlock the secrets of Slavic DNA, one thing remains clear: the legacy of the Slavs is written not just in history books, but in their very genes.